In this video, we'll discuss the progressive tenses. If you're not already familiar with the present progressive tense, you should stop this video and go study that before trying to understand this, because this builds on that. We will very briefly talk about the present progressive just to refresh our memories, but again, if you're not already fairly familiar with it or comfortable with it, you'll want to go back and review that before proceeding here. Just by way of a brief review, the present progressive is used to talk about things that are happening right now. For instance, you are learning about progressive tenses. That would be the present progressive. And it consists of two parts, a form of estar in the present tense and a gerund. This is what that would look like in English. You are learning. In Spanish, tú estás aprendiendo. Here's our form of estar, and here's our gerund. So that's the present progressive, but it turns out there are progressive tenses all along the spectrum, all along the timeline from the past to the future. We're not going to worry about the specific names of these, but just keep in mind that to indicate that something is in fact in progress at any point, past, present, or future, we can use the appropriate tense to talk about that action being in progress. So for instance, if you wanted to say that something was in progress in the past, you already know that you could use the imperfect tense to do that, but it's also possible to use a past progressive tense. We could go with either the preterite forms of estar or the imperfect forms of estar, and then add a gerund. There's not a whole lot of difference between these. They don't necessarily come up terribly often, but you will run across them, and so it is important to be familiar with them. So for instance, if you wanted to say we were talking with Gloria, you could of course just go with the imperfect tense. Hablábamos con Gloria. But again, you might decide just to mix things up a little bit, or you might run across someone else saying, estuvimos hablando con Gloria, or estábamos hablando con Gloria. Again, it's not our intention at this point to understand the differences in the nuance here, or why you might opt for one of these or another, but you should become familiar with it. Notice that in both of these examples, we did conjugate estar in the particular tense that we chose to use, and we did use the gerund of our other verb, hablar, which gave us hablando. If we're talking about a future progressive action, we could use the real future tense, or we could even use irá plus the infinitive to do this. Here we see a slight difference in meaning. We will be talking to Gloria would be the real future tense, estaremos hablando con Gloria, or we are going to be talking to Gloria. Vamos a estar hablando con Gloria. Again, it's not super important at this point that we understand the distinction between these. Again, you may not actually run across these terribly often or need to use them terribly often, but you do need to be familiar with them. And we can even use a conditional progressive tense, which would be a hypothetical situation. We would be talking to Gloria. Estaríamos hablando con Gloria. So the progressive tenses increase, by a small degree at least, our ability to make small distinctions or nuanced distinctions between things that we want to say. By this point, you should be familiar with the preterite, the imperfect, the present, the future, and irá plus the infinitive to talk about the future, and the conditional. And as you can see, you can combine any of those things with the idea of a progressive tense to slightly modify your meanings to be a little bit more precise in what you're trying to say. And just like you learned for the present progressive tense, you now know that we do the same things to form a progressive tense in any tense that we want to talk about. We take the appropriate form of estar in the tense that we have in mind, and we add that to a gerund for our other verb.